Good morning, everyone. This is Pat McParlin from Opus, and I'm delighted to welcome you to our second webinar of May. And for the second time this month, we are focusing on the challenge of life sciences. And today, we are delighted to welcome a particularly distinguished speaker who is Michael Rasmussen, also known as the GRC Pundit from GRC 2020 Research. So welcome, Michael. I'm going to talk a little bit more about you in a second. So he's a very well-known speaker in the GRC area and beyond, a great partner to Opus and very well-known to many of you on the phone, I'm sure, anyone who follows third-party risk management. And today we're going to talk about the challenges of third-party risk management in life sciences, but as the title said, also beyond. A number of folks on the phone are not in life sciences, and the reason that we extended the invite beyond is so we are going to focus primarily on life sciences. A number of these third-party risk challenges do extend across industries, and I know, Mike, you're going to mention that as well. So I'm going to tee up a little bit and talk about Mike, and then we will have a question and answer period at the end of the session. So as always, you can submit questions and answers as we're going. Today we're going to hold the questions and answers until the end so that Mike can go through his talk track. So just a little bit about Opus. As a reminder, our mission is to free your business from the challenges and complexity of managing customer, supplier, and third-party risk. And so what do we mean by free your business? Risk management and compliance can support your business objectives and provide major competitive advantage. And sometimes risk management and compliance can be looked at as a burden or a chore, might be thought about in terms of fines. And at Opus, we look at this as a way to free you from concerns and from freeing yourself from specific regulations or fines. We look at this as a way of finding new, better ways of doing things to improve efficiencies and effectiveness, and essentially so you can focus on your priorities and better serve your customers so you can grow, innovate, and thrive. At the end of the day, the goal of risk management and compliance being not to manage the risk, but using the risk as a tool to drive your growth. So that's the mission. So with that, let me tell you a little bit about Mike. As I alluded to in my opening remarks, Mike calls himself the GRC Pundit, and his firm is called GRC 2020 Research. He's an internationally recognized expert on governance, risk management, and compliance. He has specific expertise on the topics of enterprise GRC, GRC technology, corporate compliance, and policy management. He has more than 25 years of experience in these areas, and he helps organizations around the world improve GRC processes, design and implement GRC architecture, along with select technologies that are effective, efficient, and agile. He's a sought-after keynote speaker, author, and advisor, and he's noted as the father of GRC. He's the first to define and model the GRC market in February 2002 while he was an analyst at Forrester. He's quoted extensively in the press, and he's respected for his commentary on broadcast news channel. He's an honorary life member in the Institute of Risk Management for his contributions to risk management and GRC. In 2007, he was recognized as one of the 100 most influential people in finance, with specific accolades noting his work in governance and compliance, saving the planet and the corporation. And he's also been named a rising star in Rocky Times Corporate America, outstanding executive. So before founding his own firm, GRC 2020 Research, he was a vice president and a top analyst at Forrester Research, and has also led risk and compliance consulting practices at a professional services firm and within commercial organizations. So it's a privilege to hear you speak, Mike. So with that, we are going to turn over the control and the speaking to you. So just 1 second, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say to us today about life sciences and risk management and life sciences and beyond. Thank you.
Excellent. It's a pleasure to be here today, and I look forward to spending this next virtual hour with everybody, discussing, what I see as one of the most critical and challenging topics within organizations, and that is, managing third-party risks, the vendors and supplier risk in the organization. It looks like the keyboard and mouse control just moved away from me. I had it for a second.
You should have it now, Mike. Give it another try.
Yep, I got it now. So we're good. So we're going to talk about tackling third-party risk challenges in life sciences and beyond, and because a lot of this can apply to a lot of organizations across industries. The English poet John Donne said, no man is an island entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. If we place the word man with organization, it applies so well today that no organization is an island entire of itself. Every organization is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. We live in an interconnected business environment. We are extremely reliant and dependent on third-party relationships. The vendors, suppliers, outsourcers, contractors, service providers, agents, brokers, dealers, intermediaries, outsourcers, you name it. They all represent our organization. They all impact us from a risk standpoint, from a delivery standpoint to meeting our objectives, and of course, a compliance standpoint, integrity standpoint. So you rolled back the window like 30 years ago, and life sciences organizations and other organizations were more self-contained. The term insider was pretty much a synonym for an employee. Now, in the modern organization, half of our insiders or more are not employees. They are contractors and consultants and temporary workers and outsourcers and service providers and brokers and dealers and agents, intermediaries, and you name it. In fact, I've been interacting on an enterprise policy management deal that is for a large consumer packaged goods firm. And they have about 100,000 employees, but their policy management program is going to extend to over 200,000 because they're going to touch all the outsourcers, service providers, temporary workers, contractors, because they all have to understand the organization's policies and things. It's quite challenging being able to manage the range of third-party relationships. Their problems are your problems, and you have to be able to deal with those and manage those in your life sciences environment or other industry environment. And they bear down on us, and it's significant. In fact, we face the chaos of risk interconnectedness. Chaos theory is the theory where the flutter of a butterfly's wings in the Netherlands makes tiny atmospheric changes that can influence they have a cascading effect that can influence the development and path of a hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico. It's those little unforeseen things that might seem small in and of themselves, but as they cascade and intersect with other risks, they become a significant issue in the life sciences organization. That quality issue, that health and safety issue, that social accountability issue, like child labor, forced labor, working hours in the supply chain, you name it, they can come back and be a significant issue in the organization when they might have seemed like a minor issue in just one little respective piece of the organization. And we need to be able to see the chaos of risk interconnectedness and be able to manage this and see all these different interconnection points. I often use the story of the Titanic to illustrate this, where Captain E.J. Smith of the Titanic said, "Never in all history have we harnessed such formidable technology. Every scientific advancement known to man has been incorporated into its design. The operational controls are sound and foolproof. Yet the Titanic sank on its maiden voyage. You had to push to get across the Atlantic quickly to show its speed and power of the day. The press said the Titanic was unsinkable." How often in our life sciences organizations are we overconfident in our organization's brand, reputation, and history, like the Titanic? But the Titanic had many risk factors that bear down on us, just like we have many risk factors in our third-party management environment. There is external risks. We interact in a world where there's external environmental risks. Hurricanes and tsunamis and volcanoes and earthquakes and geopolitical risks and disruptions and everything else. The Titanic had external risks bearing down on it, in which there's already in this period of 1912 some climate change, and the northern Arctic ice shelf is breaking up and icebergs are coming further into the Atlantic. Not only that, the tidal moon poles of January, February, March 1912 were of a more significant, stronger nature, moving those icebergs further into shipping lanes, creating more hazards than were normally there. Environmental factors. In our third-party management programs, we have environmental factors and things that impact our supply chains and things that we need to monitor. We also have geopolitical risks, but we also have health and safety risks. You do the math, the Titanic did not have the proper number of life preservers and lifeboats for the number of passengers on board. They were compliant with the laws of their day, and the disaster of the Titanic helped change some of those laws. But you do the math, there wasn't the number of safety equipment for the number of passengers on board, and they had time to get off the boat, but they had nowhere to go. And so health and safety risks, and we have health and safety risks in our supply chain. Overall design of our third party and supply chain, they tell us that the size of the rudder and size of the propeller were undersized for the massive size of the ship. Do we have the right redundancy in our supply chain, and do we have and third party relationships, and do we have can it sustain the business, what we need to deliver? Quality issues. We often have to manage quality in third-party relationships, such as suppliers. The Titanic had quality issues with their third parties. It happens that the iron ore used in the rivets to hold the various seams of the ship together was of a brittle and inferior quality. And when it hit the iceberg, the seams of the ship ripped wide open, the ocean waters flooded in. Then you have oversight functions. The Titanic was getting warnings about icebergs in the area, telegraphs from other ships. One of the responses back from the Titanic was, "Shut up, we're tired of hearing about it." Just imagine the life sciences organization today. You need to be worried about GDPR. Shut up, we're tired of hearing about it. Then they slap you with a fine of 4% of your global revenues. That could happen. But the ignorance piece, the Titanic had technology to scan the ocean for hazards like icebergs. The high-tech technology in those days were binoculars. But the crew member that had the key to the cabinet was assigned duty to another ship right before it set sail and took the key with him. They didn't have access to the technology. How often is there good technology out there, like our host today, that isn't being used properly or thoroughly? Maybe it's being used one department for one aspect of third-party management and life sciences organization, but not other departments. Lastly, the Titanic was designed to stay afloat with 4 compartments flooded. But when it hit the iceberg, it decided to steer it and hit it on the side, and 6 compartments flooded. If it would have hit it dead on, only 2 compartments flooded. Then just last week, when I mentioned this illustration, I learned another element to it, that the Titanic was setting up flares for disaster. Other ships in the area saw the flares, but they just thought, "Oh, those are fireworks. They're celebrating the new ship." That's the chaos theory. It's all these little interconnectedness exposures of the Titanic that created the disaster. And my whole analogy and point here is that your life sciences organization is very much like the Titanic. There's multiple points of failure, and there's multiple risks involved in third-party risk management, and we need to be able to see the big picture and the interconnectedness of this before we have a Titanic-like disaster in our life sciences organization. That's the challenge, chaos theory, that cascading impact of risk. But we look at the range of risks bearing down on life sciences organization, and it's legion. We have bribery and corruption risks, things like US Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, UK Bribery Act, CEP&DO in France, and we have a variety of others, the OECD bribery legislation, Brazil's bribery legislation. There's lots out there, and enforcement's increasing in this area, and there's cross-jurisdictional challenges and things in which people are being called into courts and things, and regulators from multiple countries for a bribery and corruption incident, and lots of fines, and then the enforcement actions change and evolve over time. FCPA was passed in 1977, and so that makes it 41 years old now. For decades, a lot of the focus was on the first part of FCPA, the thou shalt not bribe section. Then the last 10 to 15 years, we've seen a focus on the internal controls and accounting provisions as well that weren't cited in the first few decades in the enforcement action. So enforcement changes and evolves. But life science has been under the scope of bribery and corruption investigations for many decades and years now. We got business continuity and continuity of the supply chain and third-party relationships. We have got code of conduct and ethics. I remember reviewing a Fortune 100 company's supply chain code of conduct. And I was just completely amazed that in this supply chain code of conduct for this Fortune 100 company, it was written in English and communicated in English, and was going to an audience of individuals that had English as a second language. And in that context, it was written in the passive voice and not the active voice, and had long, complex paragraphs. So right off the bat, we're making a code of conduct, a supply chain code of conduct, hard to read for an international audience that has English as a second language. But then what really surprised me was that the first paragraph says company believes, and the second paragraph says company strongly believes. So we have multiple levels of belief in a code of conduct. Never seen that before. And if that was the case, it would be backwards, because usually the first paragraph would be the most important and the second paragraph the second important. We might glance over that as English readers, but somebody that has English as a second language is going to read every word and say the second paragraph is more important than the first paragraph, and not what they're trying to communicate to this international supply chain of 20,000 suppliers. You know, code of conduct and ethics needs to be communicated. Conflict minerals, and what are we doing about 3TG, tin, tantalum, tungsten, and gold, and tracing them to the source, smelter, and mine to see if they come from the Democratic Republic of the Congo or 9 surrounding countries, and other areas of interest in that area, like EU's focus on conflict minerals. You got corporate social responsibility and accountability, and things like California's Transparency in Supply Chains Act. Environmental risks in our third-party relationships, geopolitical risk and disruption in supply chains and third-party relationships, health and safety focus, human rights, trafficking, and slavery. You have things like the UK Modern Slavery Act, which if you're doing about 37 billion pounds in revenue globally, it could be 1,000 pounds in the United Kingdom. You've got to be detailing and documenting what you're doing to address human rights and slavery across your business and supply chain, and report on that. You got import and export compliance concerns, IT security, and with that privacy, in which you've got to deal with things like GDPR, which is in focus. In fact, what's the date today? The date is the 22nd. And so in 3 days, we got the GDPR compliance deadline on May 25th. But that's looming before us. And a big part of GDPR is managing third-party risk in those business relationships, the vendors and outsourcers and service providers and contractors and temporary workers and everybody else that has access to EU citizen resident data. And that's significant. And the fines can be up to 4% of your global revenues. And life sciences firms are very concerned about that, and no matter where they're headquartered, because your typical life sciences firm is definitely going to interact and have EU resident citizen type data for employees and clients in its systems, and we've got to address that. You got labor standards. I sat on the Social Accountability Advisory Board for a Fortune 100 company, dealing with child labor, forced labor, working hours, wage and hour, health and safety of their supply chain, and dealing with the communication code of conduct and things like that to the supply chain and the measurement of risk within each supplier and facility of the suppliers. And that's significant, dealing with international labor standards, operational risk, privacy, quality, regulatory compliance, physical security, other supply chain risks. At the end of the day, it gets down to integrity, that we're doing third-party risk management for the integrity of the organization, not just to cross our T's, dot our I's, and meet the compliance requirements to get a get out of jail free card, but the reputation and brand of the organization. More and more, we're seeing that, third-party management includes compliance. That's an extremely important part of it, but people are looking beyond that to say, we want to make sure that our partners, our third-party relationships share the same values that we do, particularly with the millennial generation coming on board. That's something that's important to them. And at the end of the day, you cannot outsource your liability. You stand in the shoes of your business relationships. Their problems are your problems. Their issues are your issues, and can directly impact your brand and reputation. But we're seeing increased regulatory focus from many angles, many jurisdictions, from many different areas, like we just went through on the left. And this is forcing companies to rethink how they're approaching third-party management, because no longer can we just focus on the onboarding process, but we need to be able to manage risk throughout the life cycle of the third-party relationship in the life sciences organization. They might have been the right, supplier or vendor or service provider to do business with 3 years ago, or partner, that is, but that doesn't make them the right partner today. And how do we do ongoing due diligence and monitoring of these relationships has become a critical concern. But if I look at the life sciences organization, the most significant challenge we have is trying to manage all the change and keeping the change in sync. I went through a host of different risk and regulatory areas. Regulatory risk can be new laws and regulations like GDPR, to changing laws and regulations, to enforcement actions like increased scrutiny or change in focus, like with U.S. Foreign Corrupt Practices Act and things. Lots of legal and regulatory change, lots of change in the external risk environment, shifts in market forces and commodities and things that might be used in drugs and life sciences, medical device equipment and things like that. Geopolitical risk, competitive and industry forces, shifts in technology and the Internet of Things that could cause exposure internally, or the microwave in the break room, all of a sudden brings exposure to the organization as technology shifted and everything's connected. These are big concerns. But we have to monitor the external legal, regulatory environments and external risk environments. We also have to monitor the internal business environment. As new businesses come on board and they change relationships, and there's new third-party relationships, and others go south, and as much as our internal business is changing, the third parties' businesses are changing, and the mergers and acquisitions often bring on redundant relationships and additional relationships. You have to manage all that. Our challenge is identifying all these third-party relationships, all the different risks and compliance exposures in these relationships, and keeping all this change in sync, because it's not static. It's changing, month by month, week by week, day by day, down to second by second. Things are very dynamic and changing in the life sciences organization, and we need to keep this in sync to keep on top of third-party risk exposure. But the way a lot of life sciences organizations go about managing third-party risk is very fragmented. They've got different departments doing different pieces in different ways. One department might be looking at social accountability risks, like international labor standards. Another department might be looking at privacy and IT security risks. Another department might be looking at the bribery and corruption risks. And they're all doing things in piecemeal, sending out, surveys and Survey Gizmo or Survey Monkey, or sending things out in spreadsheets and documents and emails. It's like Hercules battling the Hydra. Hercules had many battles to fight. One was against this multi-headed dragon, the Hydra. And you cut off one of its heads and multiple heads grow up in its place. And that leads to disaster in the life sciences organization, where you've got excessive emails, documents, and paper trails. I was talking to one organization for an end of year risk report. They were taking 200 FTE hours to build a report because they had to go through and comb through all these documents, spreadsheets, and emails and gather metrics and information. It now takes them less than 5 minutes. Technically, it takes them less than 5 seconds for the report, because it's at a push of a button. But managing things in documents, spreadsheets, and emails takes a lot of time and labor. In fact, one financial services firm, not life sciences, but in financial services, told me that 80% of their staff time was nothing more than document reconcilers, as they're trying to deal with thousands of documents, spreadsheets, and emails. How do we manage all these excessive emails, documents, paper trail that has poor visibility reporting, and things are out of sync, and wasted resources and complexity? But most important, there's no accountability. It's like, how do we know that that person answered that question on that date and time, and somebody didn't change the answer to paint a rosier picture to get themselves or somebody else out of trouble? Where's the audit trail and system of record that has date, timestamps, what was changed, how it was changed, who changed it, and all this for the integrity of the approach? If you look at this whole way that a lot of life science organizations have been managing third-party risk, it's like the Winchester Mystery House in San Jose, California. This is a sprawling mansion that was built in the 1800s. It cost $5.5 million to build in the 1800s. That's one expensive house today when you calculate inflation. It's got like 10,000 windows. It's got doors that open to walls. It's got staircases that go up or down to nowhere, and skylights that are in floors instead of ceilings. The whole point of the Winchester Mystery House illustration here is that it took 37 years to build, but it had no design, no blueprint, no architect, but it had 140 some different builders. Now, in your life sciences organization over the last 37, 38 years, you've probably had 140 different builders of third-party management in your organization, from IT security to health and safety to legal and corporate compliance and procurement and all these different departments. And over the last 38 years, there's been multiple people doing their little pieces, building their little fiefdoms in their own way with documents, spreadsheets, and emails. And at the end of the day, it doesn't make sense. Instead of 10,000 windows, you got 10,000 documents, spreadsheets, and emails in different formats and things. And suppliers are screaming because they got to answer 6 different assessments from 6 different, spreadsheets and documents and survey tools and things. And it's frustrating everybody. And it doesn't make sense. Nobody stepped back and said, how can we design this in the life sciences organization to make this more efficient, effective, and agile? So the life science organizations that I interact with are telling me that they hope nothing fails. They're like the guy juggling on a bike on a high wire. They have hundreds to thousands of third-party relationships. There's different departments doing different things in different ways, often encumbered with documents, spreadsheets, and emails and manual approaches. There's growing regulatory and legal concern. The reputation and brand of the organization's on the line. They lack agility to monitor and respond to changing environments, changing legal and regulatory environments, changing risk environments, and changing business environments, let alone the changing third-party environments as well. And it's all encumbered by manual processes. So third-party management. My question for you in the life sciences organization, can you attest to the governance, risk management, and compliance, GRC, of your organization's extended business relationships? Now, what I often find is that the typical life sciences organization looks at the formation of a third-party relationships and fails to foresee issues that can cascade and cause damage to reputation and exposure to legal and operational risk throughout the ongoing relationship. We need to approach and understand third-party management in an integrated fashion across the life sciences organization. So the life science organization has to be able to see the tree, that individual third-party relationship itself, as well as the interconnectedness of relationships and risks on the organization. But even the tree itself can have a lot of branches. We might have one vendor supplier, and we might think of that risk at an entity level, but they might be offering a range of different contracts and service agreements and things like that with the organization. And each of those might bear different risks on the organization. And so we need to be able to look at all the branches of the tree. We need to look at the branches, the tree, as well as the forest, and trying to look at all this complexity and the interconnectedness of this and report on it requires that needs to be a solid strategy, process, and information technology architecture for third-party management. Now, so let's define third-party management. And defining third-party management, I take the definition for GRC and modify it for third-party management. Now, the definition for GRC is that GRC, governance, risk management, compliance, is a capability that enables an organization to reliably achieve objectives while addressing uncertainty and act with integrity. The reliable achievement of objectives is the governance function. The risk management is about addressing uncertainty. In fact, the ISO 31000 definition of risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives. And the compliance control piece is the act with integrity, not just regulatory compliance, but compliance to our corporate social responsibility and accountability statements. And so let's take that GRC definition and apply it to third-party management. And the changes are here in blue. Third-party management is a capability that enables an organization to reliably achieve objectives while addressing uncertainty and act with integrity in and across its third-party relationships. So we have the governance function because we have a third-party relationship for a specific reason. There's some type of objectives to form that relationship. What are those objectives? Why do we have that third-party relationship? What's the value to the organization? But we have to manage risk. What's the exposure in that relationship? And we have to meet compliance requirements as well as our own corporate social responsibility, values, ethics, and commitments as well, the compliance piece. So third-party management is a capability that enables an organization to reliably achieve objectives while addressing uncertainty and act with integrity in and across its third-party relationships. The governance function sets the context. It says, this is why we form this relationship and the objectives in this relationships, and we align those to the overall objectives of the organization. From there, we can manage risk. What's the risk in hitting those objectives in the relationship? Are there going to be quality concerns? Are there going to be delivery concerns in that relationship? And then the compliance. What are the controls and things to meet the integrity piece of GRC? What's the values of that organization? Do they have the same commitment to social accountability and international labor standards and human rights that we do? What about privacy and GDPR and things? Are they meeting those requirements? And there's a natural flow to all of these different pieces here of governance, risk management, and compliance in third-party relationship management. Now, when we approach third-party management in life sciences, we got varying perspectives. We can approach it from a specific risk or regulatory issue. The hot one today is GDPR, the EU Global Data Protection Regulation. You know, we're 3 days away from the compliance deadline. And I hope all of you are compliant. If you're on the phone and you're not compliant today, maybe you should be working on that. But I'm happy you're here. But the whole piece here is that there's a lot of organizations that take things down to the project risk or regulatory issue, and they're looking for solutions to help solve a burning regulatory concern like GDPR. Then you got or parts of the organization that are looking for a department function. So let's take GDPR and say that it's part of the IT security and privacy department. And so we're looking for a solution that can help us manage a range of IT security, privacy related risks, whether they're PCI DSS, New York DFS, to the GDPR, HIPAA, GLBA, Canada's PIPEDA, Australia's Privacy Act that was put into law this few months ago. You know, so managing all those at a department level. But then you got the enterprise approach to third-party management. And this is where I've been spending a lot of my time in interaction with organizations, and how do we build out a strategy that crosses departments. So we have a single type of strategy process supported by information technology that can bring together, you know, IT security and privacy and corporate compliance and legal and procurement and health and safety and all these different departments to be able to manage an integrated view of third-party relationship risk and exposure and achieve third-party GRC in the life sciences organization. So my question to you after explaining that, what's your approach to third-party management? Is it distributed and disconnected, where different parts of the organization are doing third-party assessments in different ways with little or no collaboration with other parts of the organization? Or is it a federated third-party management program, where it's a collaborative approach across the organization and its departments that provides standardized, you know, information and technology and ways to do assessments and evaluations and due diligence and ongoing monitoring of a third-party relationship? So third-party management in life sciences organization requires collaboration. It requires that, you know, privacy, IT security, procurement, legal, concern about bribery and corruption, and corporate compliance and ethics, and all these different departments work together collaboratively. And that means that these parts of the organization have to come together and to form a clear strategy. You know, what's our third-party management strategy? This should be clearly defined in some type of charter. You know, a charter that can spell out the mission and vision of third-party management, the different groups and roles, the different types of reporting and things. From there, it gets involved in the third-party management process, from the onboarding to the offboarding. We'll talk more about that. And from there, it's supported by a solid information and technology architecture to deliver on that process and strategy. But some core components of the third-party management program that need to go into this is understanding the specific goals of the program. What are we trying to achieve? Do we have a high-level vision and mission statement? Are there specific regulatory concerns that we need to achieve? Who are our audience? What's the different types of third parties? You know, we might have outsourcers, suppliers that are significant to the organization that can bear a lot of risks, and we might have minor third parties and people that come in and water the plants and mow the lawns that might not bear as much risk. How do we break up our third-party relationships? How do we define them, scope them, and rank and score them via different types of risk in the organization? What are the resources needed to implement the third-party risk management program? Accessibility, do we communicate things like a supply chain vendor code of conduct? And what type of languages do we communicate it? Do we just do it in one language, such as English, or are there multiple languages that we need to communicate it in? I was working with an international professional services firm in their RFP and looking at communicating policies in 8 different languages, for example. How do we measure? What are the different metrics involved? What's the alignment and internal stakeholders of different groups and things that we have? How do we align our internal company culture and values and communicate that and ensure that our third parties share the same values and culture that we do? And what's the executive support and sponsorship for the program? So we look at the core of a third-party management program, we have to understand the different risks out there, the brand risks, business interruption, financial, geopolitical, regulatory compliance, environmental, information privacy, all these different risks, but also the value. Well, why is this third-party relationship in place? And understand that there's a balance here of risk and reward, and make sure that that balance is properly maintained. In the core components of a program, we need to identify who are our third parties. What types of third parties are there? What are those contracts? What's the internal relationship owner of those third parties? What are the different alerts and triggers that we need to be monitoring in that third party relationship? Are they operating in a certain part of the world that's known for child labor or forced labor issues? And what's the overall risk exposure and level of control? From identification, we move to monitoring, where we monitor those contracts, we map those internal relationships for communication of different metrics and reports. We provide compliance and a validation of compliance with the contract requirements, and we monitor for changes to the risk environments and regulatory environments and business environments. We do periodic, regular, cyclical type assessments on risk and compliance in third-party relationships. And we monitor the performance of service level agreements and key performance indicators, as well as key risk indicators. And we identify internal, external events and changes and measure the effectiveness of the third-party program. And at certain points, we reevaluate the program to see it's still operating effectively and meeting our specific needs in the environment. You know, third-party management life cycle is what you have before you. You have the 6 stages of what I call the third-party management life cycle. And this can be found in my report. It's available on my website at no charge, called Third Party Management by Design. I'm happy to send that to you if you want to send me an email, if that's easier than logging in and registering on my website. But it starts with the registration of a vendor, supplier, outsourcer, to the qualification. Is this the person that we can do business with? To the contracting and negotiation piece of it, to the onboarding and communication of, you know, supply chain and vendor code of conduct and gathering information and getting attestations on policies. Once they're on board, there's regular maintenance and renewal and monitoring, to the offboarding process. But through all aspects, all 6 of these stages, we have those internal components of managing risk and compliance, managing the performance of the relationship, conducting audits and inspections, and managing the issues that arise and the resolutions of those issues and incidents in the environment. Now, third-party management strategy and process is supported by strong technology. Technology that can provide good management reporting in the environment, that we're not spending, you know, hundreds of FTE hours building reports, but they're readily accessible at a click of a button. We have a strong audit trail and system of record of evidence of what was done for due diligence and monitoring that, proper workflow and tasks and escalation procedures, the ability to collaborate and share information with multiple departments, monitoring enforcement of third-party controls and compliance. But technology also needs to be able to be integrated in the environment, like with our ERP systems and so forth, and provide good visibility and accessibility across different geographies and language barriers and cultural barriers, provide structured accountability and automation of our whole third-party management program. This means we need to be able to take in a lot of different types of information, from different contracts to the transactions and due diligence information, to geopolitical events and assessments, the attestations and certifications of the third parties, and monitoring capabilities and training, for monitoring disclosures and performance, quality and other audits and inspections and service level agreements and negative news and sanctions. You know, there's lots of third party content and information that funnels into our program. Now, if we're managing all these different content feeds and things in a manual process, it takes time, but if they can be easily integrated into a third-party management solution, and from there, you know, these different distributed and disconnected third-party data points can be integrated and mapped into the technology environment to be able to be analyzed and understand the information coming in and provide what I call 360-degree contextual intelligence. We can then build out action items on how to address growing risk concerns and exposure in the organization. It means that we have a solid information architecture that provides 360-degree contextual intelligence. So when I have a third-party relationship, I can clearly define the objectives of that third-party relationship and the risks on hitting those objectives. And the controls then need to be put in place, like for things like GDPR controls that need to be in place in that third-party relationship. And monitoring issues and incidents that can point to where controls have failed or are missing, that can go back and feed our risk models, because we have like a heat map, you have likelihood and impact, and so often we're guessing. And if we have a good history of the issues and incidents in a relationship, that can give us objective information on the history of that risk and its exposure and impact on the organization to provide more objective risk assessments, and clearly define who the roles are, who's the owner of that relationship, who's the subject matter on a particular risk area in that relationship, the policies that govern that relationship, from the supply chain vendor code of conduct to GDPR policies to international labor standard policies. I remember doing a benchmark analysis for that social accountability advisory board I sat on for that Fortune 100 company, going out and measuring working hours across several other Fortune 100 companies to see what they required. Was it compliance to local law? Was it 80 hours in a work week, 60 hours in a work week, 50 hours in a work week? Because this particular organization didn't want to be, too strict or too lenient to there, but you want to be sort of in the middle of the pack of what others Fortune 100 companies are requiring for working hours in a week. But what are those labor standards and things that we require in the policies in our third-party relationships? The regulatory obligations and being able to manage change to those, and not just the regulations themselves, but enforcement actions, and how do those impact the policies we communicate to third parties and require attestation and training on? How does that impact the issues and how we report issues? As regulations change, do controls in those third-party relationships change? All these are important, as you can see, this integrated information architecture to provide 360-degree contextual intelligence. So we have higher quality information on our third-party relationships. We optimize our third-party management processes. We can better allocate our capital to where our risk exposure is the greatest. We can improve effectiveness of our program, protect the reputation and brand, reduce costs, and make things more efficient in the organization as well. So that brings us to a third-party management technology architecture, and in which we have third-party management platforms like our host today, who is one of the leading platforms in this area. And there's other solutions that are more focused. So there's solutions out there that just do something like GDPR, and they don't do the breadth of things that a broad platform does. And so the third-party management platforms take the broad scope and go deep across different areas, while you have a lot of siloed solutions that just focus on one area and not the interconnectedness of all these risks that I'm talking about. Of course, then you have the procurement and ERP solutions that need to be integrated, and specific screening and due diligence solutions, but the third-party management platforms are the ones that cover the breadth of these capabilities for automation and tracking, and of the process and information in these relationships. But not only do we need to look at the technology, but we need to look at the third-party intelligence and content that connects into that technology, the proper forms and templates, what type of politically exposed persons, sanctions and watch lists can integrate with the system, negative news, organization and corporate ratings, geopolitical risks and monitoring of that, reputation and brand list monitoring, sourcing information, vessels data, controls, goods and substances, and IT security ratings are all third-party intelligence and content that can connect into the third-party management technology platform. But a strong third-party management technology platform, it provides that integrated process and information architecture to perform a system of record of what was done, who did it, how was it done, when was it done, so that we can have a clear communication on what policy was communicated to third party and attested to, the questions in the relationship that were asked and how they're resolved. Did we meet specific compliance requirements? If there's an exception to a policy or control in a relationship, or even like internally, like a gift entertainment policy for bribery and corruption and things, how is that documented and recorded in the organization? What's the context and sequence of events that happened? And is everything supported by a auditable system of record that could stand up in court? Documents and spreadsheets and emails do not stand up in court. You cannot provide concrete evidence that this was that person that's answered that question on that date and time, and with any level of integrity and non-repudiation in that. You cannot do that in documents, spreadsheets, and emails. And more, that's where the legal and regulatory climate is going, is to have a system of record with a strong audit trail, date, timestamp, and authentication of who did what, when, how, and why in the third-party management relationship. So an integrated third-party management program. My whole premise here in life sciences and beyond is that in today's complex economy, your suppliers, distributors, subcontractors, agents, brokers, dealers, intermediaries, partners, whoever it is, play a critical role in your business success. It's too complex to manage without an integrated strategy that includes people, process, and technology. The goal is to protect and grow value by establishing a capability to see your entire third-party management landscape and program with real-time information, not things that take 200 FTE hours to build a report, about external and internal events that may change your risk profile and impact performance. Essentially, you cannot accomplish third-party management in life sciences today in ad hoc manual processes of documents, spreadsheets, and emails. To do this effectively, to be agile, to be efficient and effective, you need a strategy, process, information, technology that brings together third-party management program in today's modern life sciences organization. So with that, we've left the last 10 minutes for questions and answer time. My contact information is before you. You will get a copy of these slides, but I'm going to turn this over to our hosts to see what questions you might have today.
Yeah, sounds great. Thank you, Michael. And so you proactively answered the first question, which we've gotten several of, which is, will folks get the copy of the deck? And so yes, everyone on the phone will get a copy of the deck. And you also mentioned your third-party management by design report. So with your permission, I'd like to send that out to everybody on the phone as well. So to ask questions, please use the GoToWebinar chat function. And looks like we have a couple of raised hands and questions coming in right now. So you mentioned a couple of times the idea of collaboration. That seems to be one of your key themes throughout the presentation. You talked about the forest, you talked about the federated approach. We hear a lot about this concept of reaching across the aisle in life sciences in particular. What advice do you have for the audience to put in place this kind of collaborative approach? How do people get started?
The first part of getting started is doing an internal assessment of how is this being done today, because third-party risks are being managed often in an ad hoc and manual process in different departments. So going through the different departments and finding out who's doing what technologies are they using, what spreadsheets and documents are they using, what's their process, their approach, are they doing things just during the onboarding process, or is it on some continual basis thereafter? Are there certain risk areas such as bribery and corruption, or health and safety in the workforce, in the third-party workforce, and things that are being missed? But doing that as is current state analysis, so that we can from there determine what our to-be state is and how we're going to get there.
Okay, great. Yeah, somebody asked a logistical question about the not being asked to log in from the start. So how will we get the deck? So when you registered, we recorded your information. So when you logged in using your link, we know who you are. So we'll use that as the login information. So just to cross off any questions like that. So so the question is about third-party risk management. Is it different for IT contacts and non-IT contacts?
Well, there's a little different aspect to risk and exposure in the organization from a lot of different purposes, and because IT contacts are going to look at some of the logical, physical hardware and hardware assets, but also some of the logical software information assets and how they're being used in third-party relationships and recorded. And that's going to be a little bit different from a health and safety risk that's going to look at the health and safety of the workforce and the facilities in my suppliers, which is going to be a little bit different from looking at bribery and corruption risk. There's different elements to collect and monitor for all these different individuals. That's sometimes why you have so many point solutions and manual processes, but a solid platform that can bring together all these can still cover all these different unique areas.
Yep, and actually, I forgive my poor eyes. Okay, it actually says IT and non-IT contracts. So I think the person was going for, are there differences around third-party risk management for IT contracts and suppliers and non-IT contracts and suppliers?
Yeah, and that's why you need to categorize your different types of suppliers, and their exposure and be able to manage that. But part of the challenge we have with IT now is with the Internet of Things, everything's connected. And so, historically, the HVAC vendor, heating air conditioning vendor was not an IT vendor and concern, but now it is. And you look at the Target breach in which millions of credit card numbers were stolen, and the heating air conditioning vendor had a legitimate connection to the Target network for environmental monitoring. That vendor was compromised and broken into by a hacker, and the hacker then broke into Target's point of sale systems because of the network connection. And the microwave in the break room can be an exposure point now. And so the challenge now is that every vendor out there, supplier and things, could be a potential IT risk.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that we did here is we worked with the Ponemon Institute on some of the information security risks. And one of the biggest things worrying chief information security officers, not just in life sciences, but across industries, was emerging technologies and specifically Internet of Things. That was one of the number one worries on their minds. I heard you bring that up proactively in there again. So yeah, definitely. So what are the hottest topics for US-based regulators in the vendor management space?
Increasing exposure at the board level and their overall risk and compliance fiduciary obligations. I mean, outside life sciences, this is clearly spelled out in financial services with the OCC requirements that vendor risk management be a board level issue. But even in the US, we're seeing a lot of focus on GDPR because it's a huge concern, even though it's EU regulation, on US organizations. And I think in general, we're seeing a lot of growth and maturity in corporate social responsibility and accountability within the US. Europe and other parts of the world is sort of led in that area, but the US is starting to pay more attention to that.
Well, you psychically intuited the next question, which is, do you think we'll see any GDPR type legislation happening in the US?
Right now, I do not. I would like to think so, but the EU regulation is written in such a broad way that it applies to a lot of US organizations, but not all. I mean, there's a lot of domestic organizations that just, particularly in the small, medium enterprise, particularly, that don't fall in scope of GDPR. But I have not seen anything yet that is going to push the US in that area, particularly the current administration.
Makes sense. What about the topic of beyond third-party risk? What about nth-party risk or fourth-party risk? What are you seeing in that area, and what advice do you have for the audience about that?
I mean, that all falls under the umbrella of third-party risk, and at a minimum, organizations need to get some type of attestation from their third parties that they're continuing that on down their third-party relationships, their extended relationships. So we're dealing with the extended enterprise. It becomes a little bit difficult to manage when we're dealing with 8 or 9 levels of a supply chain or subcontracting relationships to dig all the way down and manage myself as the organization. Some are going that route, but at a minimum, we need to get some type of attestation from the third-party relationship that we're dealing with that they're doing that proper due diligence and cascading, requirements down to their business relationships as well.
Great. So in our final minute or two, do you have any wrap-up advice for the audience as far as best-in-class advice, practice for third-party risk management? You did a great job of, articulating your story and talking about overall third-party risk management. Could you do just kind of a general wrap-up of, if you had to just leave the audience with a summary statement, this is what the audience should do for third-party risk management. Here's your key best practice.
Well, one of my key best practices I would point out is that the information technology architecture needs to be very agile and flexible, integrate into the environment, and should be deeply focused on third-party management. There's a lot of solutions available. Some are just modules and broader platforms and things. and they don't go as deep and are not as focused in this area to bring all this stuff together. I find that the third-party management platforms, and there's just a few of those out there, like our host today, that go deep on just third-party management, offer a lot more value to organizations than some of the broader GRC platforms that have third-party management just as a module.
I understand, so more focused, that makes sense. Hey, we have one late-breaking question for you before we break here is, in a global organization, how can automated intelligence and alerts be brought to the business rather than discovering them at a late stage related to breaches where the likelihood of a material change increases in the business? So I guess the question is really about what is the role of automated intelligence and alerts and monitoring proactively in the business and as part of third-party risk management?
Yeah, I mean, we could take and use artificial intelligence and things to bring in like a lot of those content and data points from the external content aggregators like negative news and PEP lists and watch lists and sanction lists, and cross-reference, intersect that with our third-party relationships to help provide more intelligent alerts that could even be based on some of the history and issues within an organization. I'm also seeing use of artificial intelligence in this area for like one vendor. They don't sell directly to companies, but work with partners like, you know, our host today, Opus, and others, but that uses natural language processing and machine learning to look at, you know, your model policy and compare it to your vendors and suppliers policies to let you know what the difference is in those, and using artificial intelligence in that way.
Great. And for some of these questions, we will answer you offline as well. So there are some nuances here that we can do a more in-depth answer offline. So if your question was asked and we didn't get to it, we will respond to you one-on-one offline. So thank you, everybody, for taking the time to meet today. And as a reminder, you can find all of the information on the Opus website. We will be responding to you with a copy of the deck, a replay of the webinar, a copy of Michael's report, Third-Party Management by Design. And I want to take another chance to thank you for your terrific presentation today, Michael, from the forest to the Federation to the Titanic. All your imagery was very vivid, and I know it stuck in my head, and I hope the audience enjoyed it as well. It was a great presentation and really, really helpful. So thank you very much, and thank you, everyone, for attending. Everyone have a terrific day. Thank you.